This episode of the program is presented by Novig. Building a program is about establishing a winning culture and finding an edge. That's why we partnered with Novig, the sports-only exchange that gives you a 10 times better chance to win compared to old school sports books. And because it's commission-free, you keep 100% of your winnings. Stop betting against the house. Download Novig and use the code the program for a match up to $100 on your first purchase.
I said, listen, until you start taking away like roster resources, draft picks, some other things, teams will happily pay a fine if they can get the number 2 pick in the draft or the number 3 pick in the draft, especially this year where it could be potentially generational.
And welcome into Bobby Marks, ESPN's front office insider. Bobby, we're back together again, man. It's good, good to see your face and good to be back with you.
We are back together. How are we doing?
Doing great. I know you're back in Florida. You've avoided the storm in the Northeast. There would have been in a different lifetime, you would have been shoveling the family out this morning, but I imagine you just put your sunglasses on and went for a walk.
We do have a little bit of a cold chill down here, but I don't want to say what the temperature is.
Well, listen, Bobby, you and I have had a lot of these conversations through the years about team building in the NBA, and we've talked a lot about it around college basketball since I've come back to St. Bonaventure. But, you found yourself, according to my Twitter feed, my social media feed, you found yourself in the news last week. I know you don't like to become the news. You've never done that, but sometimes it doesn't take much at ESPN for one sentence to thrust you into that. It was along the lines of tanking. And that's obviously been a big conversation in the NBA. You were talking about the Jazz one day. It's certainly been, you've talked about it with a lot of teams through the years because it's pretty common occurrence, but it gets back to one thing, right, Bobby, which is in the NBA, having a superstar player, changes trajectory of any franchise. And really, except for very few occasions, your best chance to get that player is through the draft and being able to draft high enough. There's just a lot of franchises who are not going to attract that player in free agency, and trading for them is obviously very difficult. And so teams do what they're doing, which is get the most, give themselves the best odds they can, especially in a year like this where there's a number of high level players. And Bobby, for all the conversation around trying to find a way to eliminate, a significant part of the league tanking and playing games that are not competitive, there still will be some level of opportunity to get that great player, and teams are going to do what they have to. They're going to give themselves the best odds by getting themselves the most ping pong balls as they can. To me, it's really hard to imagine a way you can change it.
It is. It's and what caught the ire of Ryan Smith, the owner of the Jazz, was when I commented when they had gotten fined $500,000, and I said, listen, until you start taking away like roster resources, draft picks, some other things, teams will happily pay a fine if they can get the number 2 pick in the draft or the number 3 pick in the draft, especially this year where it could be potentially generational. We've seen in the past what the draft has done for San Antonio with Victor and Dylan Harper and Stephon Castle, even Philadelphia with VJ Edgecombe. Drafting impacts rosters, impacts franchises, it impacts franchises' valuations. If you're an owner who's going to sell, you're right. It is going to be hard to listen. I know the commissioner is going to look at every option to how to whether they freeze the standings or do some other things or pick protections and change some things there. I do think teams will always try to figure out kind of what another way to, I don't want to say go around it, but trying to get those impact type players, because drafting, trading for players, free agency is probably a third level. That's how teams build their rosters right now.
Yeah, and I think people too have to understand it's not the commissioner's unilateral decision to say we're going to change our draft structure, our lottery system. At the end of the day, most owners in the NBA know it. They're going to have more than not, probably 2/3 at the very least, and probably even more than that, maybe more like 3/4 of them know that they're not a destination market for a free agent, for a great player. And when they need a star player, when they've cycled out of contention, they want to know that they can tank to go get one of these players. I don't know that the owners are going to vote for a lot of change to this because in the end, you know this, Bobby, they care about their team. So whether it's not good for the league and it's happening elsewhere, they care about their franchise and their chance, like you said, to build the valuation of it, to be competitive, to become very good. Um, I just think there's fewer guys who are going to vote based on the overall good of the league. They're voting on their own self-interest, and their own self-interest is if I need to tank, I want to be able to tank.
Yeah, and I think, listen, I think the league, there's a little bit of a slippery slope. I think when I went on TV and talked about Utah, it was based on the games they played in Orlando and Miami, where one of the games they actually won, where they were taking out their starters and resting them in the fourth quarter. And that was kind of like drew the eyebrows of a lot of teams that I had talked to say, well, wait a minute, there's one thing when you rest players, but now we're starting to rest players in the fourth quarter. And now you're starting to mess around with the integrity of the game a little bit. That's kind of where I see it. But on the other end, I think you're going on, as I said, like a slippery slope where the league is basically acting as big brother and regulate. All right, why wasn't player X in the game in the fourth quarter? He's a starter. I'm watching a game Monday night, and I'm thinking, why wasn't that? Oh, he's on a minutes restriction, right? So then, I think it becomes very hard for the league. Why didn't Toronto get fined a year ago? They were doing the same thing. I think it puts the league in a very tough position to start fining teams. Now they did it with Utah. I think it's going to be interesting to watch what happens over the next 25 games. I know teams have been warned. We'll see if draft picks come as a result of it here. But the reality of a lot of teams have created themselves enough separation in the lottery where they're okay right now.
Yeah.
The pick that Utah could owe Oklahoma City likely is not going to convey. And it's really not the lottery odds. The lottery odds, as you've seen in the last couple of years, have taken care of itself.
Yeah.
Detroit has always finished with the worst record. They never got the number one pick. Teams that Dallas went from, I don't even know, 9 or 10 to number one a year ago. It's
Yeah.
based on how do you get to that position here as far as what happens, in the NBA as far as, listen, there's about a third of the league that's probably, are not playing for anything right now. And I think that's where the commissioner is trying to say, like, hey, how do we kind of stop that, or how do we de-incentivize losing for some of these teams?
You know what's interesting to me, Bobby? This has never really been an issue in the NFL where you don't have a weighted system. The worst team gets the first pick.
Yeah.
The second worst team gets the second pick. Um, why is this never a conversation in the NFL? Why is it so different?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we had in 2010 we were 12-70 and we had the number one pick and we weren't even tanking. We were just bad. I mean, like there's a difference of just
I
like
remember.
like Indiana is
Yeah.
a good example. Like Indiana has just been hit with injuries after injuries after injuries, and Halliburton, and they got fined for her Siakam, who had played like 39 out of 41 games. In the one game they rested, they could find 100 grand for and everything here. Yeah, I don't know why we've never just got to a straight system where we're rewarding basically the worst team in the NBA.
Well, and that's what it used to be. I'm not saying they should change it back. It's just the NFL's never had to deal. Maybe in the last week or two of the regular season. I guess it's just, you know, again, as we know, the players are going to try to win. They're playing for jobs. They're competitive. you have to take it out of if you're going to try to manipulate, if you're going to try to manipulate the game, you're going to put you want to put lesser players in the game to play. That's it. You don't want to have necessarily your starters, because you can't tell those guys to not try. You just can't. And the one thing I do worry about, and I know coaches worry about in the NBA, and they have to do what they're told. Many of these cases, they have to do what they're told from ownership, from management, is what you don't want to create, though, is an environment where, when you're going to turn the switch back on and say, okay, now we're trying to win, have you created an environment of bad habits, of where you've just said, hey, this is okay? And it's maybe hard to just, I don't know if it's as easy to just turn the switch back on and say, hey, we're winning. I mean, they did say in Utah in the preseason, we're not going to do this anymore. And then they're back. But we saw what Utah did, and we'll get into this a little bit later, by trading for a Jaren Jackson. And now they have him with a Lauri Markkanen and some good young players who they will accelerate it next year. And I get it. The hope is, can we get one of these, elite young players to add to Ace Bailey and this year's draft class? And it, it's not out of the realm of possibility the Jazz are a playoff team next year.
No, you're right. I mean, I think, listen, losing is contagious. You've developed a lot of bad habits. I always thought that, certainly for some of these rebuilding teams, the goal is always to put your players in a position in March where some of these games matter. When we get to April, it certainly could change. Like Charlotte, for example, it's a great example this year. Like, the games for them matter. They're likely going to be a play-in team. Will they go far? I don't know. I think I was talking with a team about this regarding the Wizards. Washington goes out and gets Anthony Davis and Trae Young, and who knows if we'll see them again, this year. But
seems unlikely, but go ahead.
Yeah. I would say we'll probably see a memo in about a month from they're still ramping up. But I would say, and the team said to me, listen, on paper, they look really good next year. But do these guys know how to win? When they're all on the court together, do they know how to win 2 in a row and 3 in a row? And when there's some adversity here, 4 in a row here, because the group, which is there right now, is all these young players on rookie contracts. They have never been through that. They've been through 20-win seasons, an 18-win season here. And that's the challenging part, as far as when you go out and when you make a trade like that for next year. Indiana's different with Zubac, getting him there because they'll get Halliburton back. But Jaren Jackson Jr., and we saw them play with Markkanen in a small sample that was productive. Do they know how to win consistently moving forward?
This episode of the program is presented by Novig. Building a program is about establishing a winning culture and finding an edge. That's why we partnered with Novig, the sports-only exchange that gives you a 10 times better chance to win compared to old school sports books. And because it's commission-free, you keep 100% of your winnings. Stop betting against the house. Download Novig and use the code The Program for a match up to $100 on your first purchase. Change gears, Bobby. I want to talk to you about how NIL, rev share, the players making money in college basketball, the players, very good players staying longer. The lottery picks and the one and dones are still one and dones. That doesn't make them typically stay a second year. But that group that might be 15 to 30 and then certainly 30 to 60 in the draft, they do think twice about it. And in many cases, you would see in the past a player would leave, and people say, why is this guy going in the draft? He's going to go undrafted. But if he can get a 2-way contract now, I used to know this by heart. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bobby. I think it's almost $700,000 a year, right? For a 2-way, 680 something.
Yeah. Yep.
So you're like, if I'm not getting NIL or they're paying me something else under the table that's not comparable, I'm just saying in some situations, even though I'm not going to get drafted, that's still, I'm on a 2-way contract. I can spend 45 days or so in the NBA. Most young players are going to play in the G League. Like, unless you could probably count on one hand, the number of young players who don't spend at least some time in the G League, right? So, but it's changed now, right? It's changed the draft. It's changed NBA teams do get more time now to evaluate a lot of players in college, when in the past they were moving very quickly through here. How's it changed the draft? How's it changed, do you think, player evaluation in the NBA?
Well, I think you're getting a lot more older players in the second round. I mean, the numbers a year ago were, it was from the draft is 2 nights now. It's from the first night to the second night. The age gap is significant, where you're getting more 3 and 4 year guys who are in the second round. You're getting more players on two ways who are, which is an extension of your roster that have been in college for 3 or 4 years. You're getting, the ability to make a two-way, as you said, you're making 650, 660,000. Second round picks are a little bit different now. Now they're, some are 3 or 4 year, guaranteed contracts, in that sense here. But it does give you a better evaluation because players are staying in college longer. We just had the rookie sophomore game, out in LA, and, you look at the comparison of the sophomores that were selected versus the rookies. The rookies were primarily all players selected in the lottery. Cooper Flagg, Con Knippel, Derek Queen, Jeremiah Fears in that group. And then you look at the group that, sophomores, it was primarily picks after the lottery into the second round and undrafted. Jalen Wells, for example, players like that. I get the Spencer brothers, Cam Spencer in Memphis. He goes 58, I think, to Memphis, who played at UConn there. So there's a number of those players there that you can find value because they're the 24-year-old that you've been able to scout for 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and they're more ready to contribute when they get to it used to be in the second round of the NBA draft, teams wanted maybe that physical specimen who had tremendous athletic ability and measurables, but it hadn't done much yet. And so we're going to use that second round pick to develop that player and see if they can become something. Where now, partly because of how the salary cap works and teams who are over the cap and their inability to use free agency or even sign players to minimums based on where they are in the tax bracket, they want that 23, 24, 25-year-old college player who's ready, who can actually come in and help them. And they're not looking necessarily as developmental as this is inexpensive labor. And again, we have access to those picks. We may not be able to sign or bring in more veteran players. And I think that's impacted. And I think at our level, at the mid-major level, the Atlantic 10, the Mountain West, the WCC, I think you're seeing players in the NBA, if you play at this level and you're really productive and the NBA gets to see everything you can do, I think that's an advantage in the second round. You're showing them everything you can do as a player and you're doing it against high-level competition. And I think that has more value now in the eyes of NBA teams than maybe prior to this new collective bargaining, this new financial structure, and the penalties that are there for the league teams.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think, we talk about, aprons and these restrictions as far as teams have from a roster standpoint. And I made a point I think it was back in January. Cleveland was playing Philadelphia, and Cleveland's got the highest payroll. And they went down there and beat Philly twice. And I said, hey, this is how you can get around the apron rules, right? When you have Jalen Tyson, who was picked, 21st. You have Craig Porter, who was undrafted. You have Tyrese Proctor, who was drafted in the second round. And then you have Naquan Tomlin, who was a two-way. Those 4 players contributed for like 60 points that game. So when you have Donovan Mitchell and at the time Darius Garland and Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen, players that are making 150, 160 million, when one of those players get injured, you have that support staff for the player you drafted in the second round, player you drafted it on 2A. So that is, that's the beauty of, that's like building a roster, right? Like to find that 8th or 9th man on your team.
And the that model has transferred to college basketball, certainly college football, where, we have a player, Caden Charles, who's been outstanding for us this year, played 3 years at North Georgia Division II school and was getting recruited by other Division II schools in the portal and one other school, one other Division I school he had visited that's in a smaller conference than ours. And, when you bring that player in and perhaps much less of an investment in rev share NIL, and you hit it on those guys, like you've got to find those players to complement the guys that are taking up a bigger piece of your payroll. I mean, what we do is, I have all the NBA payrolls, and I shrink them down to what our payroll is. And so I can look and say, I look at the Cleveland Cavaliers payroll, for example, and say, if Donovan Mitchell played at St. Bonaventure and here's our payroll, here's how much he would make. Here's the percentage of the payroll he would do. And it's an interesting exercise for me to look at, because it's not the dollar amount that jumps out at you when you're doing this. It's what is the percentage of your payroll. And just like you're seeing NBA teams trying to find value along the margins, we've got to do a great job of trying to find value among the margins and saying, hey, we're going to pay, what's the number? 5 or 6 guys, real money. And then the rest that we've got to then trust our ability to go out and evaluate players, develop players. And it gets back to this too, Bobby, when you look at, and you knew this working with the Nets and you know it now in your role at ESPN, it always costs more in free agency than it does to re-sign your own players. You always overpay. You almost always overpay in free agency for players who have been productive. Everybody sees them. They're out there. And I think that's really true at our level. And NBA free agency almost doesn't exist anymore. I mean, it's changed so much because the rules reward players to stay where they are. It's kind of like take the money now and fix the destination later. I'm going to take my current team, if they're going to max me out or I'm going to get the most I can get from them, I'm going to take that. And then I'll just ask for a trade later, because going into free agency means you're probably going to take less among the elite players anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways why free agency is kind of non-existent is, the rules of extending with your own team. It's become more lucrative. You can extend for more years. We've saw I think we've averaged like 19 players per year in this CBA, extending veteran extensions. Prior to that, it was like 3 or 4 per season. We've gone through this trend of, we call this kind of pre-free agency. We saw it a year ago with Toronto going out and trading for Brandon Ingram. And Ingram was hurt at the time, and the Raptors were heading toward the lottery, but they go out and get him because he was going to be a free agent, and they wouldn't have been able to sign him with cap space because they didn't have any. So they trade for him, they extend him. Now Toronto is a top 5 or 6 team. Even this past deadline, you mentioned it with Utah with Jaren Jackson Jr., the 2 in Washington with Young and Davis, Ivica Zubac in Indiana, for 3 teams that are buried in the lottery right now, but all 3 moves that are more towards, for next year. Ayo Dosunmu in Minnesota is another player. Kobe White in Charlotte. Got teams going out. We've heard so many teams saying, well, their bird rights were important. Well, what does bird rights mean? The ability to sign that player and exceed the salary cap here. That's important to teams. So you do start to see these different trends. I agree with you when you're going back to, like, when I look at numbers now, it's not $42 million. It's, all right, that player's 21% of the salary cap. People talk about the demise of Oklahoma City. They extended all these players and the second apron's coming in here. And I always remind people, that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's salary is 22% of the salary cap? He's still on his other extension, and his next deal doesn't kick in for another 2 years here. Guy who's the MVP and is 26 years old here. So you have to take into context a guy making, what does $38 million mean in 2026, 27 compared to maybe what it was, 10 years ago.
Yeah, and it's changed dramatically, and it really is starting to mirror what we have, obviously on a much smaller scale, in college basketball. Bobby, great to catch up with you as always. I know we'll be talking plenty here coming up, and It's always good to see your face.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you again to my guest this week, ESPN's front office insider, Bobby Marks. Be sure to catch the program again next Wednesday.